Well, good morning, everyone. Construction on my road here this morning, but we'll be in the office here in a second. Welcome to the CI Chit Chat. My name is Mitchell Hora. Thanks for hopping on and joining here today. It's like every Tuesday, and variety of different things that we'll go through. Variety of questions that have come in over the last week. If you got questions, of course, put them in the chat. I'll be parked and sat still here in just a minute, but happy to take questions, happy to dig through, or if anyone wants to come on and ask a question, you definitely can as well. We're running solo here today, and we'll dig through answering your questions. Make sure that continue to get you the info that you want. So, starting as we always do with what the heck is this CI thing? What are we talking about? For all of you that are new, continue to get lots of new folks every week. I appreciate you joining us and digging in to learn a little bit more. So we're talking about CI. CI is short for carbon intensity, and it is a unit of measure that is very prominently utilized in the energy sector, especially with fuels and that kind of thing. And carbon intensity is a standard unit of measure where they can cross compare the carbon footprint of different fuels. And in the instance that we're talking about, in this scenario, we're talking about comparing ethanol, corn-based ethanol, to fossil fuel gasoline, or to diesel fuel, biodiesel, sustainable aviation fuel versus regular petro jet fuel, so on and so forth. So carbon intensity, the units on it is grams of GHG equivalent, or greenhouse gas equivalent, per megajoule of energy. So that's how they can compare all these different types of fuels. That measurement system and the calculation stuff comes from the US Department of Energy, and they have a model that they created back in the 90s called the GREET model. That's GREET. It's an acronym, but it is the gold standard for being able to calculate the carbon footprint of different fuels. Why it's important for all of us is that, especially when we're talking about renewable biofuels like ethanol, biodiesel, and sustainable aviation fuel, part of the carbon footprint of those fuels comes from the feedstock, aka the corn or soybeans. And part of the calculator is the ability for us to calculate the carbon intensity or the carbon footprint of our bushels. And then these companies buying our bushels can utilize our actual carbon intensity score in their calculation in regards to their biofuel carbon intensity score. So the crop, the corn or soybeans, has a carbon intensity to it. It's essentially the carbon footprint of each bushel that we're producing. It's calculated, utilized this Department of Energy tool. And at Continuum Ag, we've integrated that tool into our topsoil software to make it really easy on the farmer and help with documentation of practices and verification of CI scores. It's with that verified CI score that you can potentially earn a premium as these markets unfold here as early as later on this year. The tax credit is called 45Z, and it's due to start on January 1 of this coming year. So that'll be for fuel produced in 2025. Fuel produced in 2025 is produced with the crop that we are growing in 2024. So hence, we got to get going on this now, get our ducks in a row now, get our data organized, and be ready to rock and roll with these markets. You have to factor in everything. So we're looking at the fertilizer, the fuel usage, if you're using the cover crop, if you're using manure, basically everything. Everything gets factored into that overall CI score. And then it's divided by the yield. So it's essentially your carbon footprint per acre divided by the yield coming off of an acre. That ends up equating to your CI score. These bushels, we don't know exactly how much it's going to be worth, how much you're going to get paid, but at the biofuel producer, they earn tax credits of up to 2 cents per CI point reduced below a baseline of 50 per gallon. So 2 cents per point per gallon below 50. And all these different facilities are at different levels of starting point, different levels of understanding. And but everybody's monitoring what's going to happen. And the big holdup is we still don't have the final rules. Now, so updates and all that. Last week, the EPA director, Michael Regan, he made an announcement that they are getting very, very close, and was saying that they're just within a couple weeks. Now, again, it's the same old, right? We've been hearing a couple weeks for now more than a month and a half. So it's continuing to sit and wait. However, one of the announcements that came out was just an additional validity that they're going to hurt corn-based ethanol based on this concept of indirect land use change, meaning that the land that we're farming, it's corn and soybeans, could be prairie or could be forest or could be something else if not for biofuel, which is really a weird concept, but we didn't write the rules. It's how they are. If they do change this concept of indirect land use change, it'll hurt the gallon of ethanol's carbon footprint and take it up and make it worse, meaning further from the starting blocks of a score of 50. On average today, US ethanol, corn-based ethanol, has a CI score of around like 53 to 55. Most ethanol plants are around that. There's a wide range. Some of them are close to 50 or slightly below 50. Some of them are closer to 60. But what could happen here with this updated GREET model is everybody's score that's using corn, everyone goes up by a little bit. Hopefully it's not a lot. If it is a lot, we're going to really struggle until CO2 pipelines get put in, or facility has carbon capture and utilization, where they're doing something to get additional reductions. We're going to really struggle. If they don't change it that much, it's game on and major full speed ahead. We've got calculations already ran based on county level data, showing that these ethanol plants can absolutely see significant reductions in their CI scores just by collecting farmer data based on today's practice adoption rates. We've launched the Billion Bushel Challenge in order to accelerate this progress and go and get real numbers, not just utilizing our assumptions and not just utilizing publicly available data, but instead going to farmers, getting our bushels scored to prove to our friends in the biofuel industry that we actually are already super low carbon, and helping to kind of be a matchmaker between farmers, biofuel companies, putting together the low carbon producers with folks in the biofuel industry that want low carbon bushels. As of about a week and a half ago now, we got to get some updated numbers, but we are currently at over 215 million bushels scored with an average CI score of 11.0. So most default county numbers are 29 to 30. And that's coming from the Department of Energy. All of your bushels have a CI score, whether you like it or not. And that score is a 29 to 30, somewhere in that, depends on your county. But in reality, we found that the average bushel that Continuum has scored actually has a score of 11. So a significant reduction, nearly 20-point reduction. That'd be worth as much as 40 cents a gallon to the ethanol plant once they get below 50. Or you could utilize those 20 points to make significant reductions in getting below 50, getting to the starting blocks, and start producing that low carbon biofuel. So either way, making good progress. And we need more and more farmers just getting their scores. Utilize our code BBC95 to join the Billion Bushel Challenge and get 95% off on your CI score. So it's just $25 instead of the full $500. So you can do that at topsoil.ag, get your score. That's really step number one. Know what your score is. Use code BBC95 at checkout if you'd like. That's all caps, BBC. BBC 95. And ultimately, though, you're going to want to get that data verified, and that happens at the field level. So let's get into a couple of questions here. I'll just stay in the truck and answer for you. A couple of them that came in. I'll start with my buddy Rob. Rob's been a longtime customer here in Southeast Iowa. Does CI score only give an advantage selling to an ethanol plant, or will it help getting premiums in other markets? Rob, love this. And ultimately, make sure, there we go. So the premiums in this would come from the ethanol plants or the crush plants, who are then selling into biodiesel. The tax credit is a low carbon biofuel tax credit, not a pork tax credit, not a beef tax credit, not a farmer tax credit. It's a clean fuels tax credit. So the money and the real premiums would come through the biofuel companies. And how that would work is the biofuel company wants low carbon corn to produce low carbon ethanol. And that low carbon corn creates significant financial value. And there's an opportunity to share in that. And there's going to be a variety of companies wanting to purchase that low carbon corn, creating supply and demand impact and driving up the value of the low carbon bushels. My bushels have a CI score of negative 4.1. That's a more than a 30-point reduction from the baseline or the default score in my county. Those 30 points of reduction, plenty of folks would love to have that low carbon corn. And it's going to allow me to be able to kind of shop around a little bit and see who do I want to partner with, who's going to be the best opportunity. And we collaborate together, and we go and we produce this low carbon biofuel together. And this all goes through the way that the law is written. There's going to be plenty of money for both of us, and we can both go win and bring those dollars to our rural communities. But to Rob's question, I know Rob's in the pork space. The pork industry doesn't have these tax credits. They don't have premiums for low carbon pork. But I do think they're going to have to figure that out. And I think this is going to cause a lot of ripple effect. I think this is going to cause a lot of impact throughout other non-biofuel supply chains as these folks look at the precedent being set in biofuel and they say, okay, now we understand how to score these bushels. There's some precedent as to the scoring mechanism. And now there's a precedent as to the financial mechanism. How do we actually compensate folks? What's the value of this data? And I believe that the pork industry and others are going to need to kind of copy and paste a little bit, saying, all right, in the biofuel space, there's significant dollars going into biofuel because of their utilization of low carbon corn and soybeans. How do we utilize that in the pork industry? But they don't have tax credits to pay for it. So they're going to have to figure out how do you utilize sustainable finance. The investors and the big shareholders of the corporations, they're the ones that are really pushing for sustainability and going green and lowering your carbon footprint. So there's going to have to be some share in this in the financials here and in that value and creating some opportunity from somewhere. It's my current understanding that about 65% of the carbon footprint of pork today comes from the feed. So in ethanol overall has a CI score of around 55. The corn has a score of about 29. That's more than 50% of that 55, right? 29 over 55, more than 50%. In the pork industry, same type of thing, except for instead of being just north of 50%, it's actually about 65%. So a substantial portion of the pork industry's carbon footprint is coming from the feed. If the low carbon feed goes to ethanol, when the pork industry starts calculating their actual carbon footprint, their actual scores at the nuanced level, they're going to find that they have low carbon corn or high carbon corn sitting there, and they're going to have a poor carbon footprint and a battle as they look to meet their decarbonization goals. So, point being is, pork folks, we've got to be communicating with the packers, communicating with the end consumers, communicating with folks in the supply chain to say how we're going to compete. how are we going to compete against low carbon biofuels for these bushels and keep those low carbon bushels in the food supply chain and the pork supply chain. There's opportunities there. Been having those conversations, but they really need to ramp up. And we got to figure out what is the opportunity going to be to keep those low carbon bushels in the pork supply chain. But right now, uh, it could be very disruptive. These credits could be very, very disruptive. So, but we will see what happens. Okay, a variety of things. And put stuff in the chat if you'd like. What premiums exist for low carbon corn specifically? What should I expect? This from JMH in our online submit your question tool. Mr. JMH, we don't know what the premiums are going to be today. What we know is that the ethanol company can earn up to 2 cents per CI point reduced per gallon. So 2 cents per gallon. If you multiply that times the average conversion, which would be 2.9 gallons per bushel, that means that every point that you reduce per bushel could be worth about 5.8 cents. But that's the total value of the tax credit. We use the conservative number. You might have seen 5.4 cents because we like to be very conservative in our numbers as much as we can and say that 1 bushel of corn is only 2.7 gallons of ethanol. But in reality, most plants are 3 gallons per bushel or better. So anyway, so the average producer, though, the value is about 5.8 points per CI point reduced once you get below 50. That 5.8 points, our average producer has reduced their score by about 20 points from the baseline. So that'd be more than $1 a bushel in the value of the tax credit. But we don't know then how that's going to be split up. It's a large pie, potential for $1 a bushel or better, but that's the value to the ethanol plant. And I cannot stress that enough. We don't know what the farmer cut is going to be. There's ethanol plants today paying farmers 2 cents a bushel for their data. There's other ethanol plants that are already saying they plan on covering their cost and then giving the farmer 100% of the rest of the value of the tax credit, meaning massive broad spectrum. Most of the ethanol plants that I'm talking with, I think the share is going to end up being about 1/3 to 50% to the farmer. But ultimately, it's the farmer data that's creating value. And there's an opportunity for us to work together, farmers and biofuel friends, to come together here saying, let's incentivize getting these low carbon practices on the farm. Let's get these low carbon bushels going into the ethanol plant and really maximize the value of these tax credits. It's a 3-year tax credit program right now. We have got to make hay while the sun shines and work together and get this going. Dennis asking any updates on the carbon pipelines, hearing that they have been meetings about keeping them out of Iowa. Dennis, there's all kinds of different meetings going on, pro and against these pipelines. And overall, so everyone knows, pipelines are one solution in regards to CCS, carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage is basically, instead of carbon emissions just being emitted into the atmosphere at the ethanol plant, they can actually capture that CO2, compress it to a liquid, and then put it in a hole in the ground. Some, and usually those are like 1 mile, 2 miles deep. It's called geological storage. But anyway, these some ethanol plants just happen to be built right over the top of the ground that works for CCS. ADM over in Decatur, Illinois, for example, they've been capturing carbon over there for 10 years already. There's a couple facilities up in North Dakota. They've been capturing carbon up there for more than, I think the one plant's about 1.5 years, the other one's right about 1 year. But they've been doing this already. But they just happen to be over the right geological formations, and they can just capture the carbon and go straight down. Most of the plants, like those here in Iowa, they don't have the geological formation. So instead, they're hooking up a pipeline to them and taking that liquid CO2 and piping it up to North Dakota, where they do have the right geological formation, and put the carbon in the ground up there. Last I'd heard, they're going through the permit process, right? Working with the Iowa Utilities Board, trying to figure out what's going to end up happening in regards to the use of eminent domain. And, how is this going to be considered in regards to utilities, energy, and items that are essentially for the public good. Just like burying other pipelines, right? There's lots of pipelines out there. There's lots of energy systems that are buried, and lots of different groups that utilize eminent domain. Obviously, this one's been extremely polarizing, and at Continuum, we've stayed out of it. Right, we don't take a stance either way. The math, though, is that a carbon capture system would reduce your CI score by about 30 points. So if the typical ethanol plant is at a 55 today, once it got CCS, they'd be at about a 25. The delta between 50 and 25, the baseline of 50 at 25 times 2 cents per point, that'd be worth 50 cents a gallon in 45Z credit. Plus, they could layer LCFS premiums, low carbon fuel markets. They could layer those premiums with the 45Z credit and make some serious cash. From that score of then about a 25, they could get worked closer to zero by utilizing low carbon corn, right? It's not an either or solution here. If companies are going to utilize carbon capture, it's an and both. They can do carbon capture and buy low carbon corn. And I've got a meeting here in just a little bit on exactly that with one of our prospects. The say that this new GREET model comes out and they do ding us on indirect land use change to the tune of what California does. Essentially, what that would do is that would increase the CI score of all of our gallons of ethanol, increase by about 10 points right off the bat. So instead of being at about a 55, now they'd be at a 65. 15 points away from even being at the starting blocks for 45Z. 15 points away from any type of hope for any tax credit or any money. And at that point, farmers can get there, right? We've found that the average farmer in our network has reduced their CI score by about 20 points. But if you're 15 points away from the baseline, that means we'd have to have at least 75% farmer participation, probably close to 100% farmer participation, to move the weighted average enough to get below 50. Okay, so if you've got a score of 65 to start with, and you had 100% of corn coming from the Continuum Ag network, and in reality, those bushels were 20 points lower than the baseline. If you had 100%, that means that from that corn, instead of being a 29, now you're at a 9. That 20-point reduction would take your score from a 65 down to a 45. You'd be in the money, but only to the tune of about 10 cents per gallon total, right? You're only at a 45, baseline's a 50, 5 points times 2 cents per point, only 10 cents a gallon. So with 100% farmer participation at pretty darn low CI scores, it could work, but gosh darn, like hardly anybody knows about CI today. There's very few farmers that are getting their scores put together. Very few facilities that are publicly making awareness for farmers to get their scores. So if the farmers are going to be the ones carrying the brunt of moving the needle the entire span, people are going to really struggle, at least in year 1 and year 2 of this program. We can do it. I just laid out the math. We could get to a 45 if you're starting from a 65 based on the data that we have today from our network, but it takes some serious work. So anyway, really long-winded answer there, but nonetheless, pipelines, they're expecting maybe some functionality by the end of 2026, but likely end up being in early 2027. So going to take some time, but we will see what happens. Let's see if I got another one here. Oh, here's a good one. So JMH again, should I bother with low carbon soy or not mess with it? Yeah, this works for soybeans as well. So this is any transportation biofuel. So this is ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel. I just presented to some big wigs in the sustainable aviation fuel space yesterday. Really interesting stuff. Some of these folks that are working, they're the scientists that are working on all this and the scoring mechanisms and all that. Really interesting. On soybeans, absolutely works the same. If your soybeans are going to a crush plant and that oil going and being refined to biodiesel, absolutely opportunity. But the math per point isn't quite as good. And there's still a lot of clunkiness to the score and a lot of unknowns. So that's why we haven't focused on soybeans here at Continuum Ag. However, you can still get your score. You can still utilize topsoil. We can help you through it. It's a little bit funky, like I said, but especially with the new GREET model, should clean some things up and be sitting good. But you can go ahead and get your farm profile filled out at topsoil.ag, still run a score. And we can just help you to interpret it so that you kind of understand what's going on. We can still play with the practices and see what would it take to get to a 0 or a carbon negative. For soybeans, 1 bushel of soybeans creates about 1.5 gallons of biodiesel. And since the tax credit is up to 2 cents per gallon per point, you take that 2 cents per gallon times the conversion ratio of gallons of bushels to gallons, which in this case is 1.5. 1.5 times 2 is 3. That means every CI point that the farmer reduces on their soybeans is worth a total tax credit of about 3 cents per CI point per bushel. Now, on soybeans, you can reduce your score by a heck of a lot and still create significant potential value per bushel. But as we're splitting 3 cents per point amongst the different involved players, just a smaller pie versus splitting, nearly 6 cents per CI point, like we do with corn. So it still works. Definitely be monitoring that. Definitely be getting your data put together. The financials would still be huge on a per acre basis, especially since our CI certification program is only $5 an acre. We're talking significant ROI, but there's still just some unknowns, and that's why I haven't pushed on too much. But all right, one real quick last one. What's the most profitable way to sell low CI green? To elevators or to ethanol plants? Right now, there's hardly any elevators that are talking about this either. We would love to chat with those elevators. We are having those conversations, and they're really ramping up. But the play at the elevator would be buy low carbon bushels and pay a premium, blend bushels together, sell low carbon bushels at a premium, and make some margin in the middle based on the blending and based on the delta between what you're paying the farmer and where you're getting paid. So elevators have got to be getting this figured out. Farmers, be chatting with your local elevator, chatting with folks in your supply chain, and asking them like, hey, let's work together here, right? Let's work together. There's an opportunity here. It's coming down the pipe. We don't know exactly what's going on, but I'd love to have a conversation with them. Loop me in. Mitchell at continuum.ag is my email. Be happy to chat with those folks. Having tons, been well over 100 different groups that we have met with, having this exact conversation as to how can they participate, what's the opportunity. But they have got to start ramping up awareness, and we need more farmers getting their scores. So go to topsoil.ag, get your scores put together. We're going to be at 1 billion bushels. We want you to be part of it. And it's with that serious volume that we can really show our friends in the biofuel space that the farmers are ready to roll. The farmers are already low carbon. We just got to work together here to capitalize on these credits. So with that, all of these recordings end up on YouTube. Sorry that I was in the truck here today and not great setup, but appreciate you taking the time. We'll be back on Tuesday for another chit chat, and we have a webinar on Monday, a full hour webinar. So be sure to join. But we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.